Elliot Hayes often described his apartment complex as quiet only on the surface. It looked peaceful, lined with trimmed hedges, washed in warm evening light, but there was always something simmering beneath the silence. He had moved here 8 months earlier, hoping the distance would ease the tension between him and his boyfriend, Wesley Grant. But distance, he learned, didn't fix cracks, it only magnified them. Still, he valued the solitude. It gave him room to breathe, to think, to reset. That rhythm stayed steady, until the night a sound pushed its way into his world and refused to leave, the unmistakable sound of a man weeping through the thin drywall. The first time he heard it, Elliot froze mid-step. The sobbing was raw, full-bodied, the kind of grief that didn't sound rehearsed or controlled. He stood in the center of his living room, feeling its echo inside him. Elliot didn't know his neighbor well, only that his name was Kamari Dlamini, and that he lived with his wife, Naomi, a woman who always greeted the building with warm smiles and baskets of fresh bread. But Naomi was gone now. Everyone in the complex knew it, though no one spoke about it directly. There had been whispers outside mailboxes, quiet condolences in hallways, and the heavy presence of neighbors who didn't know what to say. Elliot had seen Kamari only twice since the news broke, once when packages were being delivered, and once on the staircase when Kamari walked past with eyes red and unfocused. Now those same eyes were likely streaming again behind the thin wall that separated their apartments. Elliot set his phone down, realizing he had been holding it without purpose. A message from Wesley blinked on the screen. "Did you eat? Let me know if you want to talk tonight." Elliot dismissed it. His mind was too tangled to reply. That he sat down for a moment, pressing his palms together, trying to decide whether it was appropriate, whether it was even welcome, to knock on Kamari's door. This was grief of the deepest kind. Was Elliot intruding? Or was he doing what any human should do when another human breaks open next door? The sobbing changed then. It became quieter, but sharper, like someone trying to hold themselves together and failing. That settled Elliot's hesitation. He stood, walked to his door, and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The apartment complex at night felt different, hushed, tighter, every sound amplified. As Elliot walked toward Kamari's door, he noticed how still everything was, how the air itself felt heavy with sympathy. He hesitated once more, hand raised but not yet knocking, then he breathed in and tapped gently. The crying stopped. That a few slow seconds passed. Footsteps approached. The lock clicked. And when the door finally opened, Elliot found himself looking into a face drained of color, swollen with grief, and holding more silence than any man should have to carry alone. Kamari didn't speak. His expression flickered, confusion, exhaustion, then a faint recognition. Elliot softened his voice. "Hi. I'm Elliot. From next door. I heard you. I just wanted to check on you." Kamari blinked once. Twice. Then he stepped aside wordlessly, allowing Elliot to enter. The apartment was dim, lit only by the weak glow of a lamp sitting on the floor. It looked untouched since Naomi's passing, her coat still hanging by the door, her shoes aligned neatly on the rack. A framed photo rested on the coffee table, showing Kamari and Naomi standing on a beach at sunset. Their smiles were bright and unburdened. Kamari sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. Elliot remained standing for a moment, giving Kamari space to breathe. A deep, trembling exhale escaped the grieving man's chest, as if he had been holding something in all day and it finally slipped through the cracks. "I'm sorry," Kamari murmured, his voice hoarse. "I know you don't need to hear all this." "You don't have to apologize," Elliot replied softly. "You shouldn't be alone with all of this." Kamari swallowed hard. He didn't cry again, not yet, but his shoulders shook faintly. Elliot sat down beside him, close enough to show support, far enough to keep things respectful. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, simply necessary. After a while, Kamari spoke again. "She always told me I loved too intensely. I thought that meant a good future. I didn't think it meant I'd feel this, empty." Elliot listened, resisting the urge to give tidy reassurances. Words couldn't fix this. Presence could. Naomi's memory seemed to fill the apartment even in her absence. Elliot felt it, gentle, kind, but achingly incomplete. He glanced at Kamari, noticing the exhaustion lining his face. This wasn't a man just mourning a partner, this was someone whose life structure had been ripped apart. Elliot found himself speaking quietly. You don't have to talk if it hurts too much. We can just sit here. Kamari nodded. He leaned back, breathing shakily, letting the quiet settle over them. Elliot stayed beside him, letting time pass naturally, allowing the heaviness in the room to lighten just enough for someone broken to catch their breath. Minutes slid by. Maybe an hour. Elliot wasn't keeping track. He just stayed. Eventually, Kamari wiped his eyes and whispered, "Thank you for coming." Elliot offered a small, sincere nod. Anytime. When he finally stood to leave, the hallway felt colder than before. As he walked back to his own door, he noticed Mrs. Alden, the elderly neighbor from 2 floors down, standing at the end of the corridor with a bag of groceries. Her gaze lingered a little too long on Elliot, her eyes sharp with quiet judgment or curiosity. He couldn't tell which. He offered her a polite nod. She gave a stiff one in return. Then she disappeared into her apartment. Elliot closed his own door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The silence of his apartment returned, but it felt different now, more spacious, more aware. His phone buzzed again, Wesley's name lighting the screen, but he didn't reach for it yet. Instead, he whispered to himself, almost as if confessing to the walls, "I didn't know that one moment of compassion would change everything that followed." And with that thought lingering in the air, the night grew still once more, waiting, quietly, for what would come next. Elliot Hayes woke the next morning with the vague heaviness that follows an emotional night, one that doesn't let the mind rest fully. The memory of Kamari Dlamini's grief hovered like a shadow at the edge of his thoughts. He moved through his routine carefully, as if any sudden motion might shatter the fragile quiet he had woken into. He checked his phone while sipping lukewarm coffee. Wesley had left 3 more messages overnight. They read with growing urgency, though not anger. "Are you okay? Did something happen? Please call me when you wake up." Elliot typed a short reply, "I'm fine. I'll call later," and set the phone aside before the conversation could expand into something he wasn't ready to confront. He wasn't avoiding Wesley maliciously. He just couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him, something he didn't yet understand well enough to explain. Later that afternoon, Elliot found himself standing outside his apartment with a small container of soup he had reheated and repackaged, more out of instinct than intent. He stared at Kamari's door, uncertain. Yesterday's grief had been thick, unfiltered, and Elliot didn't want to intrude again. But compassion, once started, had a way of pushing him to follow through. He knocked lightly. This time, Kamari answered faster. He looked exhausted but more composed than the night before. The bruised shadows under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept long or well. "Elliot," he said quietly, as though surprised that the name came easily. "I brought you something," Elliot replied, lifting the container like an awkward peace offering. "It's nothing special, just something warm. Helps on days like this." Kamari accepted it slowly, his fingers brushing Elliot's just long enough to notice the faint tremor in them. "Thank you," he murmured, stepping aside. "You can come in, if you want." Elliot entered again, though this time the atmosphere felt less suffocating. The lamp was still on, but the room looked slightly tidier, as if Kamari had attempted to reclaim a small measure of control. He sat on the couch while Kamari placed the soup on the counter. A quiet moment passed before Kamari said, "People keep telling me to be strong. They say it like it's a switch I'm refusing to flip." He sat opposite Elliot, hands clasped. "But being strong is not the same as being ready." Elliot nodded. "Strength isn't something you perform. It's something you recover." Kamari exhaled, a sound that was not quite a sigh. "You speak like someone who's learned that the hard way." "Maybe," Elliot answered, though he didn't elaborate. His own relationship troubles were not why he was here, but Kamari's eyes, dark, earnest, lingered on him with a weight Elliot hadn't expected. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't longing. It was trust forming slowly, cautiously, like a bridge built plank by plank. After a few moments, Kamari shifted the conversation gently. Tell me about yourself. I've lived next door for months, and all I know is your name. Elliot hesitated. The question felt innocent, but answers had consequences. I keep things simple, he said. Work, come home, try to stay out of the way. And people? Elliot almost smiled. I try not to disappoint them. Kamari leaned back. That sounds lonely. It can be, Elliot admitted that he didn't mention Wesley. Not yet. Not when the air between them felt this fragile. For a while, they talked, nothing deep, just surface-level details that allowed grief and empathy to coexist without overwhelming either of them. Elliot noticed how Kamari's shoulders eased, how the silence between them no longer felt oppressive but contemplative. Then the conversation drifted toward Naomi. Naturally, inevitably, she used to leave notes everywhere, Kamari said, staring at the bookshelf. On cereal boxes, on my laptop, in the medicine cabinet. Little reminders that life wasn't supposed to be endured alone. He smiled faintly. She believed people deserved to be seen. Elliot felt something tighten in his chest, not jealousy, not sadness, but reverence for the woman Kamari had loved and lost. She sounds remarkable, Elliot said softly. She was. The room grew quiet again, but the quiet wasn't painful. It felt like acknowledgement that as the sun began to dip outside, Elliot stood. He didn't want to overstay. If you ever need anything, he said, I'm next door. Just knock. But before he reached the door, Kamari spoke again. Elliot? He turned. Would you stay for tea? Just for a little while? The evenings are the worst. Elliot paused. This was a threshold, one he hadn't expected to step over. His instinct said to be cautious. But something deeper, something human, said Kamari didn't need space right now. He needed presence, of course, Elliot said. I'll stay. They sat at the small dining table, a teapot between them releasing faint steam. The conversation drifted from memories to mundane topics, weather, music, small frustrations. It felt strangely normal, a fragile normalcy beneath which both men carried unspoken burdens. At one point, Kamari's hand brushed Elliot's as they both reached for the teapot. It was a fleeting touch, accidental, but Elliot felt it linger in the space between them. Neither of them spoke about it, but something unspoken passed through the air, something delicate, dangerous, and entirely human. As the night deepened, Elliot checked his phone. Wesley had sent another message, short, sharp, we need to talk. A ripple of guilt passed through Elliot, but he tucked the phone away before the weight of responsibility returned. When he finally stood to leave, Kamari walked him to the door again. The hallway light cast a soft glow on his face, highlighting the exhaustion but also something gentler beneath it, gratitude, maybe, or a budding trust. Thank you, Kamari said quietly. Today was better than yesterday. Elliot offered a faint smile. That's all that matters. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed once again that Mrs. Alden was nearby, this time carrying a stack of folded laundry. Her eyes flicked to Elliot, lingering with a look he couldn't quite decipher. Observation? Concern? Judgment? He gave a polite nod. She returned a curt one. Back inside his own apartment, Elliot leaned against the door, feeling the strange mixture of warmth and unease settling into him. He whispered to himself, barely audible, almost as if he feared naming it, I didn't realize comfort was becoming something else. And with that quiet admission, the second shift between them took root, unspoken, fragile, and entirely irreversible. Elliot Hayes woke with the unmistakable weight of a choice he hadn't consciously made but had stepped into anyway. The previous evening with Kamari Dlamini lingered in his mind, not as a romantic moment, not as anything improper, but as something undeniably intimate. Emotional proximity could be gentle, but it could also be dangerous. Elliot knew that better than most. Wesley's messages filled his phone screen as soon as he unlocked it. Some were short and tense, others long and pleading. The most recent said, I'm coming over today. We can't keep doing this. Elliot stared at the words until they blurred. A part of him was relieved, they did need to talk. But another part tightened with quiet dread. He wasn't ready to explain the tangled lines forming between him and the man next door. By early afternoon, a knock sounded at his door, firm, familiar. Elliot opened it to find Wesley standing there, a crease etched between his brows, worry and frustration mingling in his expression. "You look exhausted," Wesley said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Are you sick? Avoiding me? Or both?" Elliot shut the door slowly. "I'm not avoiding you. I've just had a lot going on with the neighbor," Wesley replied, his voice steady but far from neutral. Elliot didn't answer. The silence confirmed more than words could. Wesley moved through the apartment, stopping in the middle of the living room. "You've barely been present for weeks, Elliot. And now suddenly you're spending all your time with a man you barely knew before. You don't think that's strange?" "It's not like that," Elliot said quietly. "Then what is it like?" Wesley demanded. "Because from where I stand, it feels like I'm losing you to someone who isn't even trying to take you." Elliot opened his mouth, trying to find something honest yet gentle. Before he could speak, a muffled sound filtered through the wall, the soft, broken tremor of someone trying not to cry. "Kamari." The timing was cruel. Wesley's eyes flicked toward the wall, his expression sharpening. "Is that him?" Elliot felt his heartbeat stutter. "Wes, he's grieving." "I can't just ignore." "You can't ignore him," Wesley corrected. "But you can ignore me." The accusation wasn't shouted, but it landed with force. Elliot swallowed hard, guilt crawling beneath his skin. "I'm not ignoring you," he insisted. "I'm just trying to be there for someone who's lost everything." "And what about us?" Wesley asked. "Are we losing everything, too?" Before Elliot could respond, another fragile sound came through the wall, quieter, but unmistakable. A plea wrapped in silence. Wesley stared at Elliot, waiting. Elliot hesitated. But hesitation was an answer. He stepped toward the door. "I just need to check on him. I'll be right back." Wesley's expression fell. "Of course you do." Elliot opened the door and slipped into the hallway, the tension following him like a shadow. When he knocked gently on Kamari's door, it opened almost immediately, as if Kamari had been sitting close, waiting for some kind of relief. Kamari's eyes were red, his face hollowed by sleeplessness. "Elliot," he whispered. "Please, don't leave me alone tonight." The word struck something deep, sympathy, protectiveness, something Elliot wasn't ready to name. He stepped inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. The apartment felt even heavier than before, filled with a silence so thick it seemed to absorb the light. Kamari sank onto the couch, hands trembling slightly. "I thought I was getting better," Kamari said, voice breaking at the edges. "But it hits me in waves. I don't know how to keep going." Elliot sat beside him, not too close but close enough to steady the air between them. "You don't have to figure it out today. Just breathe. I'm here." Kamari's fingers brushed Elliot's briefly, not intentional, just a reflex of someone reaching for stability. But the touch lingered in the space even after their hands separated. Elliot felt the shift, gentle, quiet, dangerous. A soft knock echoed through the apartment. Elliot stiffened. "Wesley," Kamari glanced at the door, then at Elliot, reading the tension instantly. "Is someone waiting for you?" Elliot didn't answer. He didn't have to. Another knock came, firmer, edged with pain. Elliot rose slowly, heart pounding. When he reached the door and opened it just enough to see the hallway, Wesley stood there, shoulders rigid, eyes clouded with hurt he was trying not to show. Wesley took in the scene, the dim apartment, Kamari sitting on the couch, Elliot standing between worlds, and something inside him seemed to settle in the worst possible way. "I get it now," Wesley said quietly. "I finally understand." "Wes, wait," but Wesley stepped back before Elliot could finish, shaking his head with a finality Elliot felt in his bones. "It's not about him, Elliot," Wesley said. "It's about who you choose to be when you think no one's watching." And then he turned and walked down the hallway without looking back. Elliot closed the door gently, his chest tightening with a complicated mix of guilt, sorrow, and something harder to name. That he leaned against the door for a moment, eyes closed. He didn't cry. But he felt the fracture, slow, quiet, inevitable. Kamari's voice floated softly from the couch. You should go after him. Elliot opened his eyes. Would it change anything? Kamari didn't respond. He didn't need to. Elliot returned to sit beside him, both men wrapped in a silence shaped differently now, one made of grief, loss, and the truths people avoid until they can't anymore. Kamari looked at him with quiet vulnerability. I didn't mean to come between you and anyone. You didn't, Elliot said softly. Life just gets messy. Kamari nodded, eyes lowering. For a long time, they sat in stillness, two people carrying different types of heartbreak, finding fragile comfort in shared quiet. Elliot finally whispered, I don't know what any of this means. Kamari's reply was barely audible. Me neither. The night deepened, drawing shadows across the room, and the air between them held both tension and something gentle, something that wasn't love, wasn't desire, but wasn't purely compassion anymore either. It was the kind of moment that forced a person to choose between what felt right and what looked right. Elliot didn't choose yet. Instead, he let the silence stretch, knowing the real consequences were waiting just beyond it, unavoidable, patient, and approaching fast.